Today, if you want to fly from New York to London, you're looking at about 7 hours on a modern airliner. For most of us, that's an entire workday spent in the air. Now imagine cutting that time in half. No, even better, flying across the Atlantic in just 3 hours. That was the promise of the Concorde. It wasn't just faster, it was supersonic. A sleek, needle-nosed jet that soared at twice the speed of sound, carrying passengers from New York to London in the time it takes to watch a movie. It was more than just a plane, it was the future of travel. But today, the Concorde is grounded, its promise unfulfilled. So what went wrong? After World War II, the world was obsessed with speed. Fighter planes during the war had already pushed the limits of what was possible. Jet engines were a game changer. Pilots were breaking sound barriers that no one thought humans could survive. Then, the Cold War kicked off. The US and the Soviet Union weren't just racing to build bigger bombs, they were racing for the control of the skies. Every country wanted faster planes, stronger planes, and planes that could fly further than before. This wasn't just about military power, it was about prestige. Commercial airlines also wanted in on this speed craze. Air travel was still new to a lot of people, but it was growing fast. Everyone wanted to fly, and they wanted to get to places quicker. This was the era of the jet age. Airlines introduced planes that could cross oceans without stopping, and it felt like the future had arrived. But there was one goal that hadn't been reached yet: supersonic flights. Flying faster than the speed of sound wasn't just for fighter jets anymore. Countries like Britain and France had their eyes set on making supersonic travel a reality for everyday passengers. It seemed like the next logical step. The dream of cutting flight times in half felt closer than ever, and that's when the idea for Concorde was born. The idea of a supersonic passenger plane was born in the 1950s. Both Britain and France were eager to prove themselves as world leaders in aviation. The two nations joined forces to create the Concorde, a plane that will fly at over twice the speed of sound, reducing transatlantic flight times to just a few hours. Britain, still reeling from its war losses and looking for ways to assert itself on the global stage, saw the Concorde as a way to compete with the United States, which dominated the aviation industry. France too was driven by similar goals. Together, they embarked on one of the most ambitious and expensive projects in aviation history. But they knew it was going to be expensive. Building a plane that could fly faster than sound wasn't easy. It would take years of research, engineering, and testing. Both countries realized that working together was their best shot. In 1962, they signed an agreement to share the cost and expertise. British engineers and French engineers teamed up. The goal was to create a plane that could fly at over twice the speed of sound. They called it the Concorde, meaning agreement or harmony in French. It was a symbol of unity between the two countries. Britain brought their experience from building fast military jets, France added their design skills and innovation. Together, they poured resources into the project: money, manpower, and technology. It became a national pride for both nations. The project wasn't just about making a plane, it was about showing the world what they could achieve together. From the beginning, the cost of the Concorde project spiraled out of control. The original estimates for the plane's development were widely off. The British and French governments expected to spend around £95 million. By the time the project was completed, the actual cost was around £1.46 billion, roughly 15 times the initial estimates. Despite the mounting cost, neither country could back out. The treaty that bound Britain and France to the project included a clause stating that if one country pulled out, they would have to pay for the entire project. This meant that even as costs skyrocketed, both nations were trapped in a financial commitment they couldn't escape. But note this, despite its financial troubles, the Concorde was unlike any plane that had ever flown. It could reach speeds of over 1,300 miles per hour, flying at Mach 2. That's more than twice the speed of sound. It was so fast that passengers could cross the Atlantic in just over 3 hours. But it wasn't just the speed that made the Concorde special. Its design was groundbreaking. The plane had delta-shaped wings which helped it stay stable at supersonic speeds. It also had a droop nose, a unique feature that lowered during takeoff and landing. This helped the pilots see the runway, which was essential because of the plane's long and sleek shape. The engines were another achievement. Concorde used 4 Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus 593 engines, each equipped with afterburners. These engines allowed the plane to take off quickly and reach high altitudes. It flew at around 60,000 feet, much higher than normal planes. Passengers could even see the curvature of the Earth. Inside, Concorde was all about luxury. The cabin was smaller than most planes, but every seat felt like first class. The windows were tiny, but the experience of flying faster than sound made up for it. Concorde wasn't just about getting somewhere quickly, it was about doing it in style. Of course, such speed and luxury came with challenges. The challenges weren't just financial. The Concorde faced significant environmental opposition as well. The plane was very loud, very loud. Its engines produced noise levels far above what was acceptable for most airports. When Concorde was allowed to land at Dulles International Airport, its noise exceeded 120 perceived noise decibel compared to the 104 of a Boeing 727. Communities near airports complained and noise restrictions were put in place, limiting the plane's access to certain cities. The plane also got incredibly hot during the flight, especially on the outside. At Mach 2, the skin of the plane could heat up to over 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Engineers had to make sure it could handle these extreme temperatures. The Concorde also used a lot of fuel. It burned around 6,770 gallons per hour. In contrast, current Boeing 747 uses 2,865 gallons per hour to 3,723 gallons per hour, depending on the mission. This made every flight very expensive. Tickets were also pricey and only wealthy people could afford to fly on it. This limited the number of passengers. The environment was another concern. Even in the 1970s, people were starting to worry about pollution. The Concorde's engines released a lot of carbon emissions and it wasn't very fuel efficient. Some saw it as a symbol of excess, not progress. Some scientists feared that the high altitude at which it flew would damage the ozone layer, contributing to climate change. Although these fears were never fully confirmed, the environmental controversy added to the plane's woes. Finally, there was the fact that the plane was very expensive to maintain. The technology was cutting edge, but it required constant attention. Engineers had to keep it in top shape, and that cost a lot of money. All these barriers, high costs, noise problems, environmental worries, and political resistance made it hard for the Concorde to be successful. Despite its speeds and luxury, these challenges kept it from becoming the future of air travel. The Concorde wasn't just a technological project, it was a political one. Both Britain and France saw the plane as a symbol of their global prestige. The Concorde was supposed to be a diplomatic victory, a way for Britain and France to assert themselves on the global stage. However, the political ambitions behind the plane couldn't make up for the fact that it wasn't commercially viable. The Concorde was designed for a world that didn't exist. Airlines wouldn't be willing to pay exorbitant sums for a plane that could carry only 100 passengers, far fewer than its competitors. By the time the Concorde entered service in 1976, it was clear that it would never be a financial success. The plane was expensive to operate and only British Airways and Air France ever bought it. Most other airlines saw it as too costly and too niche to be worth the investment. Even for British Airways and Air France, the Concorde was a financial burden. British Airways estimated that the plane would lose them £25 million a year. Despite its incredible speed, the Concorde simply couldn't compete with more efficient subsonic planes like the Boeing 747. The cost per passenger mile for the Concorde was 3 times that of a subsonic plane, a figure made even worse by the oil crisis of the 1970s. Fuel prices went through the roof, and this hit Concorde especially hard. With its high fuel consumption, the plane became even more expensive to operate. It was harder for airlines to make a profit, and many began questioning if it was worth it. The crash of Air France flight 4590 in year 2000 was a turning point. This was Concorde's first and only fatal crash. The plane took off from Paris but soon caught fire and crashed into a hotel, killing everyone on board and several people on the ground. Investigators found that a piece of metal on the runway caused the crash. The metal punctured one of the tires, sending debris into the fuel tank, which led to a fire. This tragic event raised questions about Concorde's safety. Many people lost trust in the plane, and demands for flights dropped sharply. The terrorist attack of September 11, 2001 also changed air travel forever. After 9/11, fewer people were flying, especially on expensive flights like Concorde. Airlines across the world were struggling, and Concorde was no exception. The combination of high costs, safety concerns, and a drop in passengers made it harder to justify keeping the plane in service. By the early 2000s, the writing was on the wall. Concorde was too expensive, too noisy, and too difficult to maintain. Air France and British Airways decided to retire the plane in 2003. The final moments were emotional, with many people sad to see such an iconic aircraft grounded for good. Even though Concorde was a marvel of engineering, it simply couldn't overcome its challenges. After nearly 30 years of flying, the dream of supersonic passenger travel came to an end. The era of the Concorde was over. The Concorde flew for almost 30 years from 1976 to 2003. During that time, it became a symbol of luxury travel, catering to the world's elites. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders all flew aboard the sleek white jet, enjoying champagne and caviar at 60,000 feet. But behind the glamour, the plane never made financial sense. In the end, the Concorde was more of a diplomatic project than a commercial one. It represented Britain and France's attempt to assert themselves as leaders in the world of aviation. As the Concorde made its final flight in 2003, the world had changed. Airlines were no longer interested in speed at any cost. Instead, they wanted planes that were quieter, more fuel efficient, and able to carry more passengers. The era of the supersonic passenger jets had come to an end. Even with the downfall of the Concorde, the future of supersonic travel is still filled with potential. Engineers and companies are working on new technologies to bring back supersonic passenger planes. One of the leading companies in this field is Boom Supersonic. They're developing a plane called Eventual, which promises to fly at Mach 1.7. This is slower than the Concorde, but still fast enough to cut long flight times in half. For example, a flight from New York to London could take just 3.5 hours. Boom wants to avoid some of the mistakes made by Concorde. They're focusing on reducing fuel use and making the plane more environmentally friendly. Boom plans to use sustainable aviation fuel, which is better for the planet. They're also working on designs to reduce the noise made by the plane. The goal is to make Eventual quieter than Concorde, especially when flying over land. Boom has announced that supersonic XB-1 demonstrator aircraft has started test flights, and the company is targeting supersonic flights by the end of 2024. NASA is also developing new supersonic technology. Their project S59QSST focuses on solving the noise problem. When a plane breaks the sound barrier, it creates a loud sonic boom. This was a big issue with Concorde as it was banned from flying supersonic over land because of the noise. NASA's S-59 aims to change that. The plane is designed to make a much quieter sound, more like a soft thump than a boom. If this works, it could allow supersonic planes to fly over land without disturbing people on the ground. NASA's work is still in the testing phase, but the results could change how we think about supersonic travel. If they can prove that supersonic flight is possible, it could open up new routes and make supersonic travel more practical. While the future of supersonic travel is exciting, there are still big challenges to overcome. One of the biggest is cost. Supersonic planes use more fuel than regular planes, which make them expensive to operate. Even with advances like sustainable fuel, the cost of flying at supersonic speeds is still high. This means tickets will be likely more expensive than today's flights. Only a small group of people may be able to afford them. There are also environmental concerns. Supersonic planes produce more carbon emissions than subsonic planes. Companies like Boom are trying to solve this by using cleaner fuels, but it's still a challenge. The aviation industry is under pressure to reduce its carbon footprint, and supersonic planes need to meet these new standards. Despite these challenges, the dream of supersonic travel is still alive. In the near future, we might see the return of commercial supersonic flights. It won't happen overnight, but the technology is getting closer. If these new planes can overcome the challenges of cost, noise, and environmental impacts, we could be flying faster than sound once again. Would you want to fly in a plane that is faster than the speed of sound? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more deep dives like these, like and subscribe.